Thank you, Mahalia. My name is David Tan. I'm the formulation scientist from ADV and also part of the IQ Consortium. I have the honor today to introduce Dr. Chenu Murthy, Executive Director, Global Regulatory Affairs CMC at Merck, and also the head of the Devices and Combination Products Group in Merck. Dr. Chenu Murthy graduated from BPharm from University of Bombay and a PhD in Pharmaceutical Sciences from University of Missouri. He also obtained an MBA from the Rutgers University. Chenu has 25 years of experience spanning pre-formulation, product development, technical operations, and regulatory CMC. He has also been affiliated with several professional associations, namely AAPS, PHRMA, IQ Consortium, ISPE, and other Combination Products Coalition. And without further ado, I would like to pass the stage to Chenu, who will guide with us and share with us his experience on regulatory considerations for pediatric drugs and combination products. Chenu, all to you. Chenu, can you hear us? I think the audio is not going through.
Brief introduction on the drivers for pediatric formulations and the substrate or the context for the many regulations and guidelines that have come about in recent years in this area, including the general considerations, the types of products for pediatrics that we're dealing with, and with a special eye on drug-device combinations, not just because that is my special area currently, but also because there's an ever-growing need in the pediatric realm to take these into consideration. And then we delve into the core of the presentation, which is the regulations and guidelines, particularly from the US and EU standpoint. And latching onto that, speak as well to the special aspects of combination products. We'll conclude with a case study, an interesting one coming out of a recent filing in Europe, and then close out the presentation. Next slide, please. So by way of acknowledgements, I'd just like to thank a few of my colleagues here at Merck, Asha Rajapaksha, Celeste Frankenfeld-Lamb, and Abhishek Telang, who's in my group, as also IQ for both the opportunity to present here, as also to share some views and perspectives. I'd like to emphasize that much of what I'm presenting today is the opinion of myself and some of my peers here that I've acknowledged and are independent of positions taken by my company, Merck. The next slide, please. So why do we work on pediatric products? And this is perhaps more of a connection to the previous presentations in the series as much as what's to follow later this year, from what I understand. First and foremost, of course, is the medical need in many therapeutic areas. And indeed, I would even elevate this to unmet medical needs in many instances. There is a need for clinical studies specific to the pediatric population, as also the need to have pediatric specific formulations, in other words, custom formulations to ensure compliance and accurate administration. The second driver is the financial one, which is the incentive for extended exclusivity, which is 6 months at the present time in select markets. And finally, the one that we'll speak to most centrally, regulatory requirements and considerations, which agencies clearly are aiming towards, such that the pediatric segment, a very important segment obviously of our population, is well catered to. Next slide, please. So let me start with some background. So historically, pediatric treatments have been off-label. Physicians would give fractionated doses, titrated doses of adult formulations before regulations kicked in more centrally some decades ago. And once these kicked in, or concurrent with them, we noted that there were multiple development challenges from a holistic standpoint. For one, the pediatric market is relatively small. In other words, the pediatric patient market is relatively small and also entails high development costs. Oftentimes, we're talking of a scale issue here. The difference between pilot and commercial scale all but disappears frequently enough with commercializing these dosage forms. There are ethical challenges in clinical trials, which are, it's almost an intuitive thought. There tends to be slow enrollment when you have the pediatric population involved. And because of the diversity in age, as also other diversity factors that come into play in clinical studies, the patient needs differ very much. So there is no such thing as a target. There are multiple targets when we conduct pediatric clinical studies. One of those, of course, is linked up to the next bullet point, which is formulation and dosage form appropriateness, which varies with age based upon the capability at different ages to for specific formulations of the same drug. Adult formulation needs continue to play a role here. Aspects such as physicochemical properties, stability, and processability are still in play just as much as those pediatric needs that need to be emphasized, such as palatability, ease and accuracy of administration, and safety, points that we'll come back to in subsequent slides. And as a result of all of these general considerations, we also, but expectedly, note that there's enhanced health authority scrutiny. It's incumbent upon this general area. Next slide, please. So let me just touch upon some of the pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic challenges that also have to be taken into consideration as we speak to the regulations and guidelines that we must respect. So there's highly variable PK/PD across the age range under study. Differences in the in gastric emptying, pH and permeability, surface area available for absorption. So varying kinetics, varying absorption characteristics, varying metabolism. There are great differences as in infancy, particularly in the first 18 months, with organ growth and systems developing. And an important point to note is that the maturation in infants is not linear. So any study done at a certain age is more of is more indicative of that age as opposed to something that can be interpolated or extrapolated from a PK perspective. Also, body size and body weight does weigh considerably across populations in the pediatric realm. And the tolerability to excipients differs even within a clinical study. So AEs that have been noted can be quite all over the place and do inform us in some pretty idiosyncratic ways when we study these drugs. There are also compliance drivers, naturally, and those attributes that inform compliance, such as palatability, swallowability, and peer pressure. One kid may just simply tell another kid, you know, this tastes yucky, or something to that effect. And there is there's every possibility that a child may may spit something out in an uncontrolled environment or in a true clinical setting. So we need to think long-term here and ensure that we are transcending some of these compliance drivers appropriately. The ability to administer a dose accurately is extremely critical, particularly with low doses in small children, as also the setting is very important. So I'll be speaking to a fair extent on combination products, of course, but some of the concepts and the precepts in that area apply even to those pediatric products that may not be treated as combination products when registered. Next slide. So specifically for solid formulations, the common dosage forms that we see include granules, powders, pellets, beads, so these are encapsulated, or what we've seen most frequently, which are mini tablets. And I won't be speaking specifically to any of these. I just tried to capture some overall aspects or characteristics that we need to take into consideration that also form the basis for some of the guideline requirements. One is age range, and in an EU reflection paper, it's been noted that solids should be dissolved in liquids for administration at less than 6 months of age. This is a requirement. There is a clear need to study compatibility with different foods, and underlying that, we need to look into the physical and chemical stability with admixtures of these foods. So stability in that milieu, if you will. Cultural preferences. It's very common to study compatibility and stability in media such as applesauce or honey or some such other media, but these may not be common in all parts of the world. So how do you get to something that is more representative from a global perspective? Allergies in children. Complete dose delivery when mixed with food. Are we getting full recovery? Similarly, children spitting out or not ingesting what they're given. And the impact of negative food effect in terms of absorption or release from the matrix. So clearly, these are all target product profile related attributes that we need to resolve in development. But again, the guidelines and the underlying regulations have been set up with some of these attributes or some of these characteristics in mind. Next slide, please. For liquid formulations, be they suspensions, solutions, or parenterals, they very commonly could be treated as a combination product or a drug device combination or a biologic device combination in select markets. And these would mostly be in the US and the EU. In rare instances, it also would be treated as such, but with a lesser burden in Canada and Australia. And one country that jumps to mind where we would have to look into this, especially as a drug device combination, is Malaysia, based on recent changes in regulations in that country. But again, I'll speak to some of these requirements in greater depth in a subsequent slide. For liquid formulations, the acceptable volumes are very critical, going back to the EU reflection paper that I just alluded to. For the less than 5 years age group, the recommendation is that a maximum volume of 5 mLs be considered, and 10 mLs as a limit in the greater to 5 years age group. So typically you could think of that as 5 to 17 years. And similarly, there are recommendations for maximum injectable volume, which varies by weight. Goes without saying that taste is an important factor here, as also chemical and microbiological stability. And for injectables, irritation at the site of injection and osmolality, isotonicity, factors that you would take into consideration just as much for any parenteral formulation. So nothing that would be very highly buffered or have high buffer capacity or extremes of pH. These are some of the considerations that are very critical, though not hard-coded for data now, specifically within pediatric populations, but certainly more important for those that are for chronic dosing. Next slide, please. Thank you. So once we have looked at these target product profile aspects, the next question we need to ask ourselves, particularly with dosing accuracy and compliance in mind, is do we need to include a measuring device, sort of as a kit or a co-package with our product? It's a consideration that we must make just as much for all formulations, be they adult formulations as well, but because of very specific pediatric regulations and requirements, the question becomes more central for these kinds of products. So in the US, and pardon the wordy slide, we have some principles that FDA has put out there. One, by way of safety considerations for product design to minimize medication errors coming out of DMEPA, and the other one for dosage delivery devices for OTC products, for liquid orals. And the first one generally says that whatever applies to OTC products is applicable to all ingested prescription liquid drug products. So in other words, if you're going to have something that's a suspension or a solution for a pediatric product, we ought to be equally looking at some of the OTC considerations that FDA has put out there, which we may not be aware of. So something for the CMC, regulatory CMC folk in our companies to be cognizant of, something they may not be doing regularly in the course of their line of work. And the dosage delivery device should be included for all orally ingested OTC products that are liquid formulations. So you can see the connection between the second and the first principle within the US. In the EU, there are guidelines on there's a guideline on the development of medicines for pediatric use. And the guideline states that administration for powders and granules does require a measuring device unless it is packed such that a unit dose or a single dose is automatically assumed by way of primary packaging, such as a sachet. Or for a liquid, a measuring device is necessary and quite similar to what the US requires. So the catch-all from this, the take-home from this, is a plain and simple yes. We must consider a measuring device in every instance of a pediatric product. Whether that is included or otherwise will take us to the next level based upon the clinical need for that particular product. Next slide, please. I apologize for the slight lag. So we have a few pediatric combination product examples. This slide has some animation and it'll come up. There it is. So here are two products: Emend powder for suspension, which is an antiemetic for children, and the other one is Noxafil oral suspension, which is an antifungal product. So in the first one, we have a kit involving a mixing cup, an oral dosing dispenser with two different volumes because there's variable dosing involved here, a pouch containing the drug product, and a package insert instructions for use, which supplants, or I should say, which is additive to the SMPC or the product leaflet, information leaflet, and a cap for ensuring accuracy of dosing. So the question here is the mixing cup a medical device? And by definition, it is not, because it is not used in terms of delivering the correct dose. It is an aid, but not in of itself a quantitatively measuring device. As also, it does not act on the body. It does not have any implications on entry into the mouth or any other body part, and it's only used to reconstitute the powder. So it forms a part of a kit, and technically it's not regulated, or the regulated component within this product being a combination product. On the other hand, the dispenser, the graduated syringe, is the combination product element in the case of Emend powder for suspension. By analogy, for Noxafil, the spoon is considered a medical device because it is marked with calibrated units, which is intended to facilitate the correct dispensing by the caregiver. Next slide, please. So whenever we have, so from this point on, let me delve most centrally, most directly into the regulations that are in place for pediatric products. So these kick in whenever we have a new dosage form, a new indication or dosing regimen, a new route of administration, or a new API, or a form of API, a ligand or salt of API, made more amenable for pediatric administration, all relative to the adult formulation, which may have already been registered. So these are the fundamentals that underlie the act and the regulations that I'm about to describe. So the first one is the Pediatric Research Equity Act, or PREA, which mandates safety and efficacy studies in the pediatric population and requires a pediatric study plan, which is due to FDA at the end of phase 2 studies. The second is BPCA, or the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children Act, which is a voluntary, it's voluntary for companies to conduct these studies, but provides a financial incentive to do so in the well-known 6-month exclusivity. And it is this act that makes a provision for a pediatric study request, which is in the form of a written request detailing the study design and the rationale for the study design. And this written request, which is submitted in clinical development, then elicits FDA feedback, which also then allows the company the ability to conduct these studies only after the adult studies have been completed and indeed the adult drug product have been registered. However, the approval for such a written request must be in place at the time of registration in the US. In the EU, similarly, the pediatric regulation provides an incentive for a 6-month exclusivity, It requires a pediatric investigation plan, which includes formulation development and clinical studies. This is due a little sooner than in the US, so at the start of phase 2. And there is a constraint that it cannot be received after the initiation of pivotal studies. So in the event that a phase 2 study is positioned as being pivotal, which can happen, it's very critical that companies do present the PIP ahead of that. And for each new medicine, a PIP needs to be presented unless a waiver has been granted. Next slide, please. So a little more on the PRIA. I did cover this primarily in the previous slide, so I will not go into the bullet point details here. But the take home is that PRIA gives FDA the authority to require pediatric studies for certain drugs based upon the therapeutic area and the need in that therapeutic class. The studies must use formulations that are age appropriate, and the goal of the studies is to obtain the correct pediatric labeling for the drug product. Waivers on the basis of PRIA, a full or partial waiver may be obtained, and the justification for this is based on whether a study is impossible or not practical. So clearly, if a disease state doesn't exist in the pediatric population, it forms a pretty much ironclad justification not to pursue a pediatric development. Similarly, if there's evidence from either epidemiological evidence, published evidence, or company evidence to show that a drug would be ineffective or unsafe, then we could get that waiver, or that if the drug does not offer adequate therapeutic benefit over existing therapy or may not be used extensively, or else it is just not possible to develop a formulation, and there's been some pre-work done on this. And this is very rare and may not work. I think this is a very ambiguous justification and can only be considered on a case-by-case basis. Next slide, please. From the European perspective, the PIP involves a development plan for pediatric drugs. It can be modified, so development does continue over time, and with early clinical findings with the pediatric program, changes may happen, and those submissions can happen as amendments. Deferrals, again, much like with the US, are available, as are waivers. I mentioned the timing previously. What is critical here is that there must be a compliance check, that one must verify that all measures of the PIP decision have been completed appropriately, and in so doing, a pre-submission ahead of a pediatric submission in the EU takes place with a group called the PDCO. It takes approximately 2 months, and they will first rule that the application is appropriate in terms of fulfilling all the PIP requirements before the filing itself can be made and the review can proceed. Next slide. So from a timeline perspective, this slide speaks to when we must have data available or positions available at a minimum. So for the PIP, noting whether we have a dedicated pediatric formulation, we must have some information at the start of phase 2 for Europe, so that means it covers FDA, and quality measures are considered commitments. In other words, whatever basis we have for our pediatric formulation, whatever we have by way of citing, by way of using common compendial excipients, by way of preliminary acceptance criteria, these are all to be considered as commitments even at this stage, though we commonly don't put that detail into the PIP. We speak to what may the formulation look like and justify why that is so. Similarly, for a pediatric study plan, it's encouraged to have this within 60 days of the end of phase 2 meeting, speaking to my previous slide about having this in late phase 2, and it must be in place before the start of phase 3. Next slide, please. So there are pediatric guidances as well, as this slide comes up for everyone. These are just a few links for us to bear in mind. Pardon me, it's a little slow. Okay, so one important one for formulation consideration is a draft guidance that FDA put out in 2016 on the use of liquids and soft foods as vehicles in drug product administration. So specifically in this guidance, they recommend appropriate liquid selection to these vehicles, standardizing the methodology, in vitro methodology. So dissolution and compatibility are highlighted here, and recommendations to communicate accepted vehicles, qualified vehicles. So if certain foods are found unacceptable, they should be included in the labeling. So the bullets here speak to how we must approach it from a pediatric development perspective. So validated methods, appropriate sample handling, and assessments in the mixture itself. So this is additive to what we may have clearly done for the adult formulation. So integrity of the API or stability of the API in the vehicle, having a sensitive potency assay, and ensuring the integrity of the active in use, the stability for the longer term, both during preparation and, when I say longer term, maybe storage, which could be as much as 24 hours, and homogeneity in vehicles. Next slide. And there are some other FDA guidances of interest on for chewable tablets, for the size, shape, and physical attributes for generic tablets that would be of interest, and the size of beads for drug products labeled for sprinkle. I'm not going to get into these guidelines in the interest of time, but they're very central and relevant for pediatric development. Next slide. So let's speak a little bit to the drug-device combination aspects. So co-packaging of devices to prepare and administer the drug is clearly what is in play here. They're regulated as combination products in the US, and the formal term is non-integral drug-device combinations in the EU. So what you would think of as co-packaged, that's the formal term for it in European registrations. Again, additional emphasis on verification of dose accuracy and compatibility. And in the EU, for sprinkles or powders, there's an expectation that we provide the devices in the kit. And these devices are CE marked. In other words, they are approved as the individual device. And usually the CE mark is obtained by the vendor and not by the pharmaceutical manufacturer, but it could be as much by the pharmaceutical manufacturer. Next slide. Some other regulatory considerations, some additional work that needs to be done for drug-device combinations are biocomp and extractables and leachables. What I have done for this slide is linked up each of these considerations with appropriate standards or guidelines. We also have something called essential performance requirements. Think of these as patient-centric specifications for devices and combination products A guideline is expected in this regard from FDA. This is very much driven by the Office of Combination Products and the Center for Drugs and Radiologic Health, CDRH, in the US. And this is expected soon. So something to look out for, and very relevant to pediatric formulations as much by way of dosing accuracy and so on. Stability as the combination product. So there's an enhanced need for shipping studies and mechanical or functionality testing, such as break-loose blood flow in a syringe for dosing purposes, things that you would not otherwise be looking for a non-combination product. I'll speak to human factors in the next slide. And overall, from a GXP perspective, there is an emphasis on design controls coming out of ISO requirements. So look at this as as QBD on steroids, so to speak, for the device component in your drug product. Next slide. So let me just go into a little more depth on human factors, because this is one aspect of pediatric combination product development that does take up a considerably greater amount of time, strategy, and planning. So what is it? Fundamentally, it's the understanding of how target populations interact with technology. And they look into the state of health of the user, the physical strength, dexterity, cognitive state, ability to understand instructions in different settings and among a broad swathe of users. So typically, human factors engineering requires testing at two stages. At a formative stage, so with a prototype, to develop the specifications themselves, we do an initial study, and then at the end of what would be the commercial image, we validate that with tests, what are known as tests which are known as summative tests, and these include appropriate training and labeling materials. So waivers for these are possible, but they're extremely dependent on the nature of the product. So if it is exclusively in a hospital setting, in a controlled environment, there may be the possibility to get a waiver for summative testing. If it is primarily given by, it is dosing by a parent to a child, has a very wide pediatric dosing age range, it is less likely that we can get away from these sorts of usability engineering or human factors engineering studies. An appropriate risk analysis and comparative analysis also needs to be done as a part of human factors. So I'll close this out, next slide please, with a quick case study involving a hydrocortisone tablets drug, which had two strengths. It's Alkindi is the name of the drug. There were two strengths, 10 milligrams and 20 milligrams for the adult formulation. This is hydrocortisone used in adrenocortical insufficiency. And the pediatric formulation, unlike the adult formulation, is a capsule with multiple strength granules, 0.5 to 1.5 milligrams in strength, involving different excipients and involving an age range of birth to less than 18 months. So the two things to take home: a change in pharmaceutical form and a change in strength. Next slide. So I'll go through these relatively quickly. A PIP waiver was obtained for the higher age group. Two BE studies, these were relative BE studies were conducted, full BE studies, fully powered BE studies were conducted against the adult formulation. So twice the 5 milligrams and 4 times the 5 milligrams versus 10 milligram and 20 milligram adult tablets. And the dose proportionality in a BE setting was studied, and it was noted that there was nonlinear PK across the age range studied. It was noted that this was probably due to protein binding at higher doses, so it leveled off, and it was unlikely due to absorption because the drug did have good absorption. Interestingly, there was a waiver for the low end bracketing on the basis of how this may be administered clinically. So it is noted that there is greater uncertainty of BE between the lower strengths and corresponding reference product doses. And this would be minor relative to tablet crushing. So on the basis of clinical practice, a waiver was given, not something that you can typically see for an adult formulation. Similarly, it was noted that there was high variability in vitro dissolution profiles. But because a BE study was conducted, these issues were not considered to be central to the approval for this particular drug. So I have a bottom line there on the slide here. Establishing BE relative to adult image across the pediatric dose strengths are challenges, but the overall clinical practice and favorable benefit risk profile helped in moving this drug forward in spite of these challenges. Next slide. Palatability was the other issue. There was absence of long-term palatability data. The interesting aspect here is the applicants supported palatability with secondary acceptance criteria from their phase 3 studies, which had a 1-year duration. But more interestingly, it was also done by means of an IPC, an in-process control of the taste masking layer, where they showed that the dissolution method was discriminatory to the coat. And on this basis, on the basis of the IPC and also restrictions on the labeling, where it says, give a drink at the time of administration, or if served with soft food, give within 5 minutes, they mitigated non-compliance, potential non-compliance issues due to palatability. Next slide. And pardon me for rushing through this in the interest of time, but I'd be happy to take any questions. So again, there was a waiver for age groups greater than 18 months. However, the agency pointed out the possible risk of swallowing granules in children above 6 months, in children between 0 and 18 months of age. And the response, which was accepted, was published data that showed that granules of a diameter less than 800 microns was acceptable across all age groups for which this particular product was targeted, and that a granule size of 0.5 to 1 millimeter was acceptable. So on the basis of both published data and competitive intelligence, the risk of choking was considered to be low, and this was accepted. Next slide. And finally, as noted at the get-go, this particular product is granules in an intact capsule, but the capsule is not intended to be swallowed. It is nothing but packaging. So no relative BA or BE studies comparing the actual ingestion of the capsule relative to the granules themselves was done. And it is expected, of course, that there would be a delay as a result of the burst of the capsule. However, there was no toxicity concern associated with the capsule itself, but the risk to choking was then mitigated on the basis of labeling restrictions with a commitment to do appropriate post-approval monitoring. Now, this approval came about a couple of years ago. Since this time, agencies have moved to a certain higher level of scrutiny around the issue of ingestibility and choking hazards. So this would have to be likely addressed beyond information from the literature. So I would throw that cautionary note in as we proceed with pediatric development going forward. So some closing thoughts on the next slide. So pediatric development is indeed unique and challenging relative to adult drug product development. And these studies are of central interest to the agency. The regulations are clearly in place for us to adhere to. And there's a recent joint document as well to submit pediatric development plans simultaneously to Europe and the US, particularly in today's COVID-19 environment, such that we can act upon this earlier and with urgency. The combination product requirements are additive to the pediatric requirements, and clearly they enhance the level of scrutiny. So the bottom line is planning early, preparing for challenges, ensuring that our pediatric population have been well served in terms of the diligence of our development and have been appropriately formulated, adhering to a TPP that is indeed pediatric centric. I will also leave you with another thought, a hanging thought. China has published a slew of guidelines in 2020, but haven't as yet got most fundamentally into the pediatric space. But next year in 2021, we do expect to see some guidelines. We also expect to see guidelines in the combination product space. So stay tuned. With that, I thank you for your attention and turn this over to David.
Thank you very much, Chenu. Appreciate you going through this very detailed presentation with us. I have a couple of questions coming in, and this feels questions centered on certain themes. I'll start with first question. For a drug product that is co-packaged with a dosing device, for a drug product that is not co-packaged with a dosing device, and syringes will be provided by the pharmacist, what type of human factor studies need to be conducted? And would these human factor studies need to be submitted as part of the marketing application, despite not being a combination product?
Excellent question. So this is still an ambiguous aspect, but the reality on the ground is that we have been getting questions from DMEPA in relation to medication error prevention that require some aspect of usability engineering and human factors. So the short answer is yes. These such sort of studies need to be taken into consideration, even where there is only pharmacy manipulation for pediatric products. And the recommendation from a regulatory CMC perspective is to ask the agency, set up a meeting, a Type C meeting with FDA with a robust justification on the basis of what's called a TAUEA, or a user analysis, to keep the acronym simple, and a comparison relative to other products which may have similar packaging, similar users, similar clinical use setting, and so on, and see what their needs might be for that program.
Okay, thank you, Chenu. I think the second question is with regards to one example that you shared for the EMAT. So for a wide dose range, typically you shared that we provide 2 sizes of syringes. From a human factors evaluation perspective, how can we ensure that the caregiver and patients use the appropriate syringe, and what data do you use to provide to generate that information?
Right, I think I introduced level of complexity in that example, which hopefully doesn't occur with most programs. Our goal in development should be a single device to reduce complexity, obviously. The requirement here is in the IFU, or the instructions for use, that we very clearly state which syringe is linked with which dose. In general, the flexibility that we seek when we put out pediatric formulations is a single formulation with multiple possibilities by way of dosing, rather than the other way around. If you have multiple formulations, you cannot obviously have multiple products in, co-packaged in a single secondary package. So so that's what we need to bear in mind in how we develop these kinds of complex products. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. So in the interest of time, I will ask one more question, and for the remaining questions that were not shared today, I think we will forward to Chenu after the webinar and get his help to reply via email. I think the last question is the oral syringe. If we were to include an alternate oral syringe from a different vendor, can we leverage on the data generated on the syringe that we currently use, or do we need to have data for both syringes? Assuming that both syringes are similar.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I lost the connection momentarily, but if the question is if we are sourcing syringes from a different vendor relative to syringes that have been approved from a previous vendor, do we need to redo some of these studies? I'm not sure that I got the question because of the connection here, but if that is the question, the answer is typically yes, because we need to show that the two syringes are not just comparable, but it's really essentially equivalent. However, we can make a good argument for a waiver for that based on equivalence data. So this is in terms of design and material of construction, and most importantly, the delivery, dosing accuracy, the force of the break loose glide force, also taking into consideration the interplay with the drug product itself, viscosity, surface tension, and other obvious attributes of the drug product.
Okay, thank you very much, Chenu. I appreciate the deep insight that you provided us today, and we will share with you additional questions after the webinar. And with that, I'll pass back to Mahalia to debrief us.
Thanks, David. Thank you, Chenu, for a great presentation. I would just like to encourage everyone to send any additional questions that they may not have had an opportunity to enter into the module. Send them directly to me, and I'll pass them along to our speaker today. And also to let you know that we will be including a feedback survey tomorrow. You will be receiving a feedback survey on this webinar, and we encourage you to complete that webinar so that we can continue to provide quality and informative webinars for you as members and to the public. So with that, I'll go ahead and close the webinar down. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.